Young men in America are shifting to the right, young women to the left, but that divide goes far beyond politics. I'm Charity Nebbe. On the new season of the podcast Unsettled, we'll mind the gender gap in romance, education, health, and safety. Unsettled, a podcast from Iowa Public Radio, part of the NPR network. This is Garden Variety, a horticulture podcast from Iowa Public Radio and Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. I'm Charity Nebbe. Spring is known as planting season, but you can get a lot more out of your garden if you plant some crops multiple times throughout the growing season. The practice is called succession planting, and Dan Filius, Iowa State University Extension horticulture specialist, is here to tell us all about it. Hello, Dan.
Hi there, Charity. How are you?
I'm good. So succession planting. First, let's start with a definition. What is it?
Oh, sure. This is where you plant the same crop, but like staggered throughout the year so that when the first time you plant it, when that one is done bearing, the next one's coming on, and you can have a continuous harvest of that crop throughout the year.
All right. So you're really maximizing your production. You might also be controlling the amount that you get at any given time so you can actually use that produce a little more efficiently, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And we don't want, I was going to say we don't want a ton of cucumbers, but that is, of course, saying that you want fresh cucumbers. But if you're pickling, you might want all those cucumbers at the same time, can them up all at once. But if you're looking for that like fresh harvest of a crop, a little bit each week throughout the season, then succession planting is the way to go rather than doing it all at once and being done.
All right. So with succession planting, let's say you have a portion of your garden and it is dedicated to cucumbers. You want to plant cucumbers multiple times. First, how many times could you plant cucumbers?
Yeah. Generally speaking, you could do it 5 times every couple weeks, from when it's frost free until the end of the season where there's a given days to maturity, right, on a crop. And when you get close to when the days to maturity would put you past that frost date for a frost tender crop like that, then you can stop at that point. It's not likely to succeed. So for cucumbers, they seem to, with pressure from cucumber beetles that lead to bacterial wilt or just poor establishment, you can having multiple successions leads to better success, in my opinion.
All right. And once you plant that first crop of cucumbers, let's say you dedicate part of your plot to that, how long do you wait before you plant the second crop?
Sure. It's a little different throughout the season. So the main difference is that between the first and second successions, because you're planting it when it is generally cooler, the summer hasn't heated up a ton, the plants aren't growing quite as quickly. So I usually give 3 to 4 weeks between my first and second successions. Also, the first succession tends to do a lot better sometimes than later ones because there's less pest pressure, especially if you're using, say, row cover or something to cover up and exclude those cucumber beetles when you are first planting that first one. So anyway, you go for that 3 to 4 weeks for the first one. And then I would say every 2 weeks after that is when I would plant cucumbers.
And at any point, would you pull out those original plants and replant in
Certainly.
that? Okay.
Oh, sorry, I cut you off. You were going to ask if I replant in that same exact spot.
Yes, I was.
Yeah. I actually do sometimes do that. I will, when I do that, like I said, I do it 5 to 6 times. I leave enough space in my garden for 5 plantings. And if when we get to the 6th time, I've got time for it and I want to do it a little bit longer, I want to chance it, maybe plant a couple more little hills of cucumbers just in case we get a late frost that year, then I do usually go back into that first spot because those ones are long done by then.
All right. Well, cucumbers, planting them 5 to 6 times, that can really maximize your production through the season and make sure you have fresh cucumbers the whole time. Let's talk about some other crops that you can plant multiple times and how many times you may be able to plant them. So what about zucchini?
Yeah, I would go 3 times with that one. And zucchini is one that really succumbs to powdery mildew, and that's the reason that I like to succession plant. Also, this one's the one that's notorious for overproducing.
Yes.
So you plant, say, one hill of zucchinis, maybe two, and you let those go, and then a few weeks later, maybe 3 to 4 weeks later, you plant the next ones, and then you can do that about 3 times, given the lifespan and production life of a zucchini.
All right, let's talk about melons.
Yeah, those ones really you can reliably do it twice. I do about 2 weeks apart, last week of May and then maybe second week of June. However, I know commercial growers who are planting very early, and they're swearing by, if I'm not, they will risk 10% of their crop every year, because when they plant it early in a year where there's not a frost that happens in, say, early May, when they plant them early, they make a lot more money from that early crop that they get in there. But so I would say you could chance, especially on a small scale, you might try going with second week of May as your first planting of melons, and then you could try to get 3 plantings of those.
All right. So if you're a risk taker, for sure.
Yeah, but 2 for sure.
All right. How about green beans?
Yeah, I go 3 times with these, a little bit, 3 times, 2 or 3 weeks apart, and again, this is a frost tender one, so you're starting as soon as soils are warm and there's no risk of frost with these. I generally start my first green beans. I plant them out in mid-May. They just don't seem to be super vigorous if I plant them too early. But one thing I do with the first succession, so I plant direct seeding 3 times, but then when my first one's done, I don't rip it out. I sometimes will mow that, not like down to the ground, but sort of like a hedging cut almost of this bean planting, and so that there's a little branch stubs sticking out of the main stem, and that will then resprout usually and produce a second flush that comes in after the third succession that's been direct seeded is done. So that's almost like 4 flushes, prolongs that harvest.
When you say mow, you actually use a mower?
I have. I've also used like an actual hedge trimmer, or I've just used a pair of pruning shears, whatever you've got.
All right. Well, let's talk about cilantro.
Yeah, this is one that, I often see it planted in pots and put on a patio, and it's just like, or sold in a transplant plug container, at the garden center. And I think, wow, that is nice for one succession, but in the heat of the summer, cilantro bolts so quickly, so fast that really it's only good for one cut at most, because sometimes it gets away from us before we can actually get out there and cut it. And if it does bolt before we eat it, that leads to an extra intense, like soapy character to that. And even for those who like the cilantro is a polarizing vegetable or herb, and for those who do like it, it can be even a little intense at that stage. So anyway, how many times? I would say you plant this every 2 to 3 weeks, and just count on, in the heat of the summer, only one cut. So only plant a little bit of this. But once you get into, say, August, and nights start cooling down, you can get multiple cuts from cilantro. And longtime listeners will know that I'm a big fan of like growing over the winter, and this is one of those winter hardy vegetables. So I generally am starting some cilantro in September also, that is going to carry over and survive for me to have early spring harvest the next year. It's a cool season crop.
Yeah. Are there other herbs that you can do that with too?
For holding over the winter?
Well, no. Like planting 6 times throughout the summer. Are there other herbs in that category?
Sure. Dill is one that is kind of a fast one. It tends to bolt, but then people use the seed heads from dill also, so it's more useful there. I don't think as many need that intense succession planting. Parsley can really go all year, or maybe 2 plantings, because it might bolt on you, but from a really early planting, if it's vernalized. But I don't think I think of cilantro and dill as being the most. I do 2 to 3 successions of basil, but that really is more needed if you're growing a non-downy mildew resistant variety of basil, because that in the last 5 years has become more prevalent, maybe 10 years, where downy mildew is a major pressure in the Midwest that will just wipe out your basil. But so you might want to have that next succession growing so you can have more basil. But the best way to do basil is downy mildew resistant varieties.
So I think a lot of people, when we talked about succession planting and gave the definition, a lot of people probably thought about lettuce and other kinds of greens.
Yeah.
But talk me through your salad mix.
Oh my goodness. Maybe I'm a fanatic for sure, but these are things that do best in cool season also. But so like cilantro, I'm doing the 6 to 12. Some commercial growers are going 18 to 24 different plantings of salad mix throughout the year so that they can have it, just perfect. This is like we're talking baby leaf greens for salads. And there are some mixes that are better for heat than others, and people sometimes move from lettuce into more of the brassicas and maybe some beet greens or something like that will provide some more success in the heat because lettuce is the most cool season of those crops. So
all right, we're almost out of time, but carrots and
Sure.
beets, they can also be planted multiple times?
Yeah, and these ones, they really hold a lot better than, say, leafy greens do. And so these ones, I go for a spring planting, fairly early, and then I go for a main season one that's going to be going into the fall. So I've already planted my spring carrots. We're talking in the very first week of May, and I've planted them in early April, and they're doing great. But I will plant my next one, say, sometime in June, maybe even early July, and those will just last through the fall. So the spring ones will get me through to midsummer. The other ones, then I can start harvesting and have a little bit of storage from too.
And how about broccoli?
Yeah, and this one is another cool season crop that's best in the spring and the fall, but there are varieties, and some seed catalogs will tell you this variety is bred specifically to grow when it's cool and mature when it's hot. So look for that information in the catalogs, because you can conceivably plant broccoli 6 times and have a continuous harvest of that. Although many growers here in the Midwest are finding, due to humidity, the certain varieties won't the heads won't be marketable. They'll develop like brown black spots. So they're going for broccolini or sprouting broccoli instead.
Dan
which
Filius.
has better success.
Yeah, Dan Filius, Iowa State University Extension horticulture specialist. For more gardening information and tips, please subscribe to our Garden Variety newsletter. Find out more at iowapublicradio.org/garden. I'm Charity Nebbe. Garden Variety is a production of Iowa Public Radio and Iowa State University Extension. It's produced by me, Erin Stile, Caitlin Troutman, and the Iowa Public Radio talk show team. For more garden goodness, please subscribe to our Garden Variety newsletter. Just go to iowapublicradio.org/garden. I'm Charity Nebbe. See you next time.